You are listening to Radio Belvaspata, South Africa. This show is dedicated to those who live and love from the heart in infinite ways. In today's episode, we will discuss, share, gain insights, and get clarity on the wisdom and teachings of the mystic and seer Almin, as well as discover more about the miraculous healing modality called Belvaspata. Your host for this show is Paul.
Cultivate the practice of knowing the origin of your actions. Living meaningfully, deliberately and deeply will increasingly become a way of life. That's some wisdom provided to us by the great mystic and seer Almin. Hello everyone, this is your host Paul. I'm in studio with Grandmaster and friend, my sister Diane.
Thank you very much, Paul. Good evening to everyone.
I think we're going to have an incredible discussion tonight, Diane. The title of the show, as we know, is something like Arrogant, Democrazy, Mindlessness, and all about healing timelines through Belvaspata.
Oh, no, it sounds wonderful. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, really incredible stuff that's going on. You know, last week as we were signing off from the show, we were using the word destructuring and things like that. And I know some of our listeners were talking about we have to destructure to restructure. And this morning I woke up with a feeling and the thoughts about, restructuring and construction, that's all going on. But destructuring is the base of everything that we're all experiencing. And once we see that bigger picture of things, it really helps us understand. Because to get trapped and caught up in the dynamics of all of these experiences really can create a lot of, shall we say, experiences where our programs and fears all come to the surface. And it's not about suppressing it. I know we look at all of this because Eckhart Tolle himself says that, when you can find illusion and discover illusion for what it is as illusion, it then dissolves.
Yes, the moment you can sort of pinpoint it and put the finger on it, just naming it somehow makes a difference.
Incredible things then. And it was like really incredible because, as I said, we're using this aspect of destructuring, and we are destructuring everything that's in illusion.
Yes.
That's really, really what's going on for me as I look at things. And then on Almin Diary, there was some audio posted there where Almin was discussing the recent events in America with the Trump presidency and all the shock and stuff that is going on over there. So we've used the title Democrazy tonight instead of Democracy because we also know within our own country in South Africa, the word democracy is not used. It's a completely different pronunciation altogether. And some of it sounds like crazy.
Yes, it does.
Democrazy, as it goes on. And that says something.
And ironically,
that's a reality all by itself.
Absolutely. And ironically, it is crazy.
So I think, we've been so far ahead in South Africa of all of these processes, hoping it would come right, hoping this would happen. But that's all, our sacred cows are all being challenged, and they have been for a long, long time now. So that is one of the roles I think you and me and everybody else who's carrying it in terms of the light workers and the light creators and light bringers of the world are all literally holding that particular aspect in place. So,
well, Paul, when Almin talked about democracy as a sacred cow, my initial reaction was, yes, but I've always been pro-democracy, but not really looked beyond the layers of what that actually means. And her explanation that she gives is actually quite phenomenal. She talks about the lowest common denominator, and I haven't thought about it that way. So I was forced to look at democracy differently. And then I thought, what other sacred cows are being blown out of the water?
Well, we're seeing certainly huge amounts of that particular aspect coming for us. And really, I think I had one of the belief systems is that, we may be behind the rest of the world, we're a third world country, and you bite into that programming.
Yes,
only through this to discover actually you leading the way in terms of destructuring a lot of the processes, but then be careful, don't think you take on the self-importance of that particular role. To understand that we all have roles to play, we need to put our hats on and play them in order to carry everything to fruition of whatever it's going to be. Because what replaces all of that? And Almin talks about this aspect of self-government and things like that.
So the self-governance And the sacred self-governance sort of paves the way for outer governance.
And that's been an important internal dialogue for me the last year or two, is really looking at these aspects of creating this strength of self-government, because if there's no peace on the outside in your world, there's something not peaceful on the inside. And we have to take that on board ourselves and understand that we are manifesting and creating all of this on an external level for us to learn. So how do you take accountability for all of that? And when you've got a program in place, you cannot, because is democracy the way to go? I had that belief system. I mean, I grew up in this country going into the military, for 2 years, being conscripted into it, being forced to fight for my country, etc., etc. Not far from the American ideal, if you really think about it in terms of
it almost seems a universal ideal.
Yeah.
Democracy has always been held up, as this paragon of virtue, and it just doesn't seem to be working.
But I think that itself as a program itself, as it destructures, because tonight we're going to talk a little bit about mindfulness and mindlessness and what fills our mind. But the programming, as all these things destructure, there's a programming going on, oh my God, what is right, what is wrong, all those feelings come.
And that's the thing with the mind.
Yeah.
It does play the tyrannical role, and we do pander to reason.
Oh, the big problem. Shall I put it all into a box of reasoning and understanding, and then when we can't, well, this is wrong, well, this is right, as you go.
Yes, we make that judgment call.
Shall we listen to that audio?
Let's do
and then
that.
We'll talk some more when we come back.
Wonderful.
Fantastic.
There is a great feeling of destructuring happening, as though the status quo is being shaken up. What exactly is destructuring? Ich will euch jetzt nämlich kenne kiaskata eschwe askenavahi, kich beske nish kuskayava, erklech vedas kravat. You are right. This is something particularly Americans will not want to hear. He says, do you remember when you traveled to the far distant future that they called this era and the next 300-year era the struggle for globalization, for an integrated humanity? He said to do that it is necessary to dismantle democracy. Now, for us that is a sacred cow, and I have long warned, don't get too fond of your sacred cows. They will eventually yield and show themselves to be the illusion that they are. So now let's ask him, why is democracy an illusion? Does it not prevent tyrants from leading the people astray? Ich keskeshkeyanamach. Unech geveskeskeveshken me ich yakinaksa, utu uhuye Mihkana askashkana vaiskanaba utuna ukhye. Vihke kenesesye veshkatavaha unech meneskeve. He says that it begets tyranny, but a tyranny of the hidden kind. When the people, the populace, the masses in the street make the decisions that run the country, which is what democracy is about, the lowest elements of understanding are then the ones that control the outcome of a country. To prevent this, tyrants come in and subversively control the population that control the outcome. So in other words, the spying on its citizens, the eavesdropping, the HAARP, which you can look up, HAARP, technology that sways people's voting, etc., all of that is subversive tyranny. When tyranny is out in the open, it's not necessary to be so subversive in controlling the population. So he is saying democracy allows the lowest elements to decide, And because of that, it makes tyrants that control them under the table. It is that which you feel destructuring. And I must say that it is obvious to me that there are several decisions that have been made by the new president that are completely contrary to the American Constitution, that which America is based on. So it is already happening. People are afraid because he is so bold and arrogant and overconfident. But it takes such a disruptive force to disturb the thick concrete walls of the belief systems that democracy is the best way. How has this arrogant president been manifested by the population? By their arrogance in cramming down the throats of other nations democracy. It is appalling when communism, democracy, whatever theory a country holds onto is enforced onto other countries. That is arrogance, and that begets arrogance in the president that leads the country.
You're back in studio with Paul and Diane as we discuss the aspects of what we are calling democracy. We're discussing the arrogance of processes that are going on in the outer world and obviously within the inner world. We're also discussing the processes that come up in terms of the programming as we release them in mindfulness and mindlessness. We're talking about the healing aspects through Belvaspata and all the work that has been done. And there we were listening to the mystic and seer Almina. She translated straight from the mouth of angels the understanding on a very deep cosmic level what the world is now experiencing. But Diane and I just sharing in studio that for South Africa we've been going through incredibly similar processes along the way, incredible arrogance within the political circles. And yes, all of that has to destructure, and all of that seems to be happening as we're going along. So at the end of the day, Diane surrendered trust to it and work on ourselves so that our outer world and our inner world are in unique oneness. But as Almina said, the two won't merge. I think we spoke about this 3 weeks ago.
Yes, and we talked about a cooperation between the inner and outer.
Yeah.
Yes. But Paul, you know what is so astounding? When Almin talks about this arrogance and boldness and this tyranny on a metaphysical perspective, and she looks at the microcosm and she looks at the body, she looks particularly at the organs, which apparently vibrate at one of the lowest frequencies. And how can we take control of that tyranny? She talks about that. She talks about the intellect once again, and the craziness of allowing your body and your intellect to dictate. That is insanity, and that fits our program and our title so phenomenally, because there is a craziness in allowing those two tyrants to control your life. Yeah,
and yet on an external understanding and external consciousness that's playing out, we don't get that.
No, we don't.
We're just reacting or trying to respond or trying to heal or fix instead of seeing the bigger picture, literally for all what it is.
But Paul, then maybe we wanted to talk about mindfulness and mindlessness, and maybe this is a good point to discuss that. And I don't know if you agree with me, but I've been thinking about that, and I somehow don't think that they are at odds with each other. Because when I've been looking at mindfulness, I think of a kind of awareness, a kind of growing in consciousness, and then being mindful, as in full of mind. That, of course, can also be destructive. But then when we look at mindlessness, that's not the zombie kind of, mindlessness that I think
that itself
we're
is a
talking
belief
about.
system, isn't it? And
Yes.
I agree with you, because anything that we have is what it is, and if we differentiate between right and wrong, or what is or what isn't, or it's one side of the spectrum or another, we're just in separation consciousness, and everything has its role. Everything, there's a perfection in everything.
Yes.
And so for us to see that, it'd be great. Yes, sure. I mean, mindfulness might be a path of, let's say, meditation and Buddhism.
Yes.
Whereas Almin talks about, to be in mindlessness is actually to be at the seat of the genius, where everything is just flowing through you
effortlessly.
automatically and
Yes.
effortlessly through
Yes.
you.
Yes.
So, you also look, as your spiritual training on a meditation level, is it filling you with a mantra that is keeping you prisoner?
Yes.
Or is it actually taking you to the edge of the matrix, and at the end of the day we have to dissolve the old dream to allow the matrix to unfold and to dissolve itself?
Well, Paul, I'm just going back to our opening comment where Armin talks about cultivate the practice of knowing the origin of your actions. You have to be mindful of your origin, living meaningfully, deliberately. Maybe that's the kind of mindfulness that we should be looking at. And then allowing, once that state has been achieved, and I don't mean in a linear way,
Sure.
but once we've looked at that, would then the mindlessness not automatically follow, where you can live and make decisions effortlessly?
Pre-show we were just chatting a little bit about being in the moment and living in the moment. And let's look at, there's so many beautiful spiritual teachings out in the world available for us. Live in the moment, live in the now. We've had these discussions before.
Yes.
And I was just saying to you, I'm feeling lately that the aspect of mindlessness for me is living in this moment, but expanding it to its fullest potential beyond the matrix, which is only of programs and belief systems anyway.
Yes.
And then expanding it so there's no need for the next moment. Can you remember, just putting you on the spot here, I apologize for that, what you said about the timelines, what Almin had said about the timelines? If you are living in the past and the present and the future, you're creating different timelines? Is that what she was saying?
Yes, I think she was talking about that. And that's created a bit of a dilemma for me, because on the one hand, she talks about if we abandon the reality that we are in, we create parallel timelines. So yes, I can understand it from that perspective, but then I also thought that multiple timelines, multiple time maps mapped the infinite intent for the cosmos. So I'm a little bit at odds with that.
Well, I think we spoke about this on some level. I know when you did your spider timeline.
Oh, yes, yes.
Drawn, absolutely
yes.
magnificent. I think part of the process there is that we must understand is that we are destructuring the illusion that separates all of these things.
Yes.
We're not destructuring time per se. We know that that is a human-made condition to control the particular processes. But if we are destructuring the space between all of these different timelines, and as they begin to merge together, they're going to form this expanded reality of oneness or living in the moment. So I'm equating living in this moment and expanding it into living in a sense of oneness. That's what I'm feeling.
Yes.
That
does resonate with me, because I can understand then, as consciousness grows, which is a kind of energy, a vibratory energy, as that expands and grows, the jumping of the timelines would then automatically include a kind of oneness.
And that was a question I had a while ago when Almin spoke about, going down this timeline 300 years in, just travel to the future. And of course, me, I have to challenge some of these things in my own little processes and perceptions. And I said, what would happen if another timeline came in? It would change everything. So that's kind of answering where we're at, is that yes, we must have these layers of timelines going on. We are in the reality of this timeline, and it will process, but I think it's going to be added to as we're going along from the dynamics of all the other timelines that have to then merge together. How else can it not be?
Yes, because in my own head, I had this picture of, and Almin talks about sliced bread, and I was looking at each layer as being a kind of template for energy.
Okay, sure.
And then what I did was I sort of took one layer and created this sort of a spider diagram where we had a timeline which really is simply possibility. The possibility of the consciousness. And then along that timeline were billions of parallel realities, each with its own memory, each with its own principle.
As if like each star system has its own
Yes.
reality and timeline.
Absolutely.
Anyway.
And then the ability that we have to jump not only parallel realities, which is on the same timeline, but in fact jump timelines. Now that surely is creating a kind of oneness.
Has to be. That makes absolute, I'm going to use the word logical sense at this
Yes.
moment. Although, if we take ourselves beyond logic, we're going to go into so many other processes. So, we know linear time is gone. I know for myself, I still try to process aspects of my life in linear time. But let's face it, the way that we are working and living, it's Friday tomorrow. It's gone yet again. So if you equate a week to be anything, you're just going to get stuck in all of that. But the density of the way we are experiencing things is just phenomenal for me. There's like so much going on at any one point. Are you getting that experience?
It does seem to be concertinaed, as if time is concertinaing itself, and there does seem to be a density in that. But I suppose that also is a kind of destructuring which catapults you into the next parallel reality, and that those sets of principles. And now Elmina's also actually, I think it's just come out, where she talks about principles and angels for each principle. Now she's talking there, I think, about a particular timeline, and that is just incredible, all the help, all the benevolence that is always there, no matter where you are on this timeline, no matter what parallel reality you inhabit, no matter what persona you are creating. There's always.
So for our listeners who are not aware of it, what Diane is really referring to there is if you go onto almindiary.com, there's a free download from Almin, which has been posted, of Angels of the Cosmic Year, 2017 and 2018, and there's a link there where you can download the first 72 sigils of the Angels of the Days of the Time Map, which we started our year off really from January the 28th.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
And that cosmic year is from January the 28th this year up until February the 15th next year. And I find it interesting as we have extra time this year, literally another 2 weeks into this whole detail before the new cosmic year comes in. That's saying a lot to me there. But that's what you're referring to.
Yes,
so, listeners, if you're not aware of it, please go onto almindiary.com and you can get that free download. And there's incredible information in terms of the angel sigils and the angel names. And just use that angel every single day.
Yes.
We had a student in the musical. I was just watching one of his posts on his Facebook page earlier today. Excuse me. And he's got some processes going for himself, and he works on healing himself. And it's really interesting. He wrote there day 47 out of 365. And he wrote his process for the day, which is based on a religious level. That's his faith. That's how he works. And fantastic. Yes. It maintains him. It keeps him focused on what he needs to do for himself. And I just took a look at it and I thought, even that number is so incredible to come. And we arrived at class and I said, day 48 tomorrow. And he said, it's another day. And it was incredible just watching. He had a day and a sequence or a frequency or a healing to work with, that he could actually he had developed that system for himself.
And Paul, you know what he has, and this seems to be, wherever I look, this seems to be the buzzword. It's sort of flashing around me. Intention, setting the intention. That is a way to step out of the tyranny of democracy, of the body, of the intellect, of the outer space. Setting the intention.
Really, really incredible processes going on here. So, listeners, I'd just like to be able to share with you at this particular moment that Diane has done this incredible diagram we call a spider. She's called it a spider timeline, And as she said, there's like these billions literally of information coming off his timeline from all her insights and all the processes going on. She's got 3 or 4 pages of information filled out, and really incredible watching her work with it all. And just as we are discussing, as we prepare for the show, and as she comes in and as we've talked and shared over the last few days about the subject matter, it is so incredible to watch the synchronicity of the experiences going on. And so for me, I personally put things together on a mental level. I link them, and then I can put the information down. What Diane does is she writes all her information down and then she links it. So there's different approaches here, but the end result is that we are seeing the same synchronized things together. It would be quite interesting if we ran 2 simultaneous episodes at once with Diane in another studio and me in another studio, and just have the same title about what we would be discussing. And having not shared this before, and it would be fascinating what we would be coming up with.
Well, I've no doubt that we would be spot on every time, because somehow there is that link. And I just want to explain to our listeners here as well. This afternoon, I was just having a little 40 winks, and I thought I'm just going to grab one of my little sticks, put it in my speaker, and just listen to it. And lo and behold, the first words that Almin spoke about was the frequency of the organs, and then she spoke about the timelines and the strata. And so I've no doubt that not just Paul and I, but everybody out there is on the same frequency.
Yeah. So I'd just like to say thank you to Greg in America, who sent us a beautiful message.
Yes, it was
talking about last week's program and the healing intentions and the way people get it and the way people also don't get it, and they don't want to move forward. They don't understand what they need to do. But for me, I understand there are those traps. There are those situations going on even within our family structures where people are trapped in certain processes, cannot even get themselves out of it because they're so deeply trapped in their programming of all of that, inability to step out of it. And I think for me, I'm so grateful for the years of work I've done through Almin's teachings of whatever that is, Balvaspata, etc., is that it has given me at least maybe 1% ability to just see that little bit that I can do it, and then it's me that has to go and do all of that. So I'm eternally grateful for that particular process, and I think I see it around all the healers and masters around me will rise to the occasion sooner or later and say, hang on a second, and make that change that's necessary.
Somehow it does give us a little foothold into seeing the bigger picture. The contraction, the expansion, not placing emphasis on either of them, and maybe eventually going beyond that. But it does make all the difference.
Well, the beauty of Almin's teachings is that you grab hold of a process and you think that's the path.
Yes.
Only to discover a little while down the road, whether it's a few months or a year, that actually no, it's way deeper than that. And we used to go into these aspects of expansion, like you were saying earlier, and expansion and contraction is there. It's the same process, or maybe 2 sides of the same coin, and which are you playing out, and you get trapped in one or the other as being right or wrong. And the same with like cause and effect. I mean, we know that there's no longer cause and effect. It is all come together.
Yes.
But these are aspects of self-government and sacred government. So I just want to share a little bit about Balvaspata for all our listeners, just to share this with them. But everybody probably knows by now that is listening, but if you're new to Balvaspata on the show, this is really what it's about. It's the alchemy of revealing the existing underlying perfection. It's accomplished through the use of angelic light and frequency, through what's called the sigils of the angels, the connections. It can be compared to having their names and phone numbers to call for their divine assistance. It is magic of the highest order. It is white magic. How shall we define magic than magical life? It is life lived without the gap between cause and effect. Perhaps it has been helpful that a gap has existed between cause and effect on our pathway to mastery of our mind, body and soul levels, whilst learning the mastery of self, silence of mind, living in eternal time. The result is self-sovereignty, self-governance, sacred government of oneness through self-government of peace. And if peace exists within, then it also exists outside, without, as we're going along. And that's just some points to consider on what Balvaspata is. And you're talking there about the frequencies of the organs of the body.
Yes.
And we know through Balvaspata usage and the healing that each organ comes into play for us. And there's several teachings through Almin's work through Belvaspatar, where we can bring all of those into balance, whether it's through the alchemy of Belvaspatar by itself, whether it's using meridian work connected with it. There's just so much definitions of all that coming through.
Well, Paul, something which I hadn't really thought about is that the sound that our cells make are different. For example, the sound that the cells in the lungs make are very different from the sound that the cells in the heart make. And I find that is so astounding, that sonic signature. And I know Nick, who always manages to orchestrate the most amazing music, he must be aware of this because he deals with this amazing vibratory quality of sound waves. And I've just been exposed to that lately, and I'm blown away by the magic, the alchemy of the world around us.
It's fascinating. I know 3 weeks ago you were speaking about sound waves and coming back on each other. Wouldn't it be amazing for us to be able to measure the frequency of the organs as they go through healing? I know we can measure the frequency of the brain. We've seen that scientifically. But can you imagine as we bring the angels in through Belvaspatar, and that's particular frequency aligning with another frequency to bring it to its highest state of perfection that it can achieve? Can you imagine measuring all of those together and just watching that healing take shape?
Well, imagine the body, I mean the organs, the meridians, the pranic tube, imagine all of that vibrating at its highest potential and frequency. Imagine the magic that we could make.
I think that's incredible to also look at, because we know through other healing methods really they work with light.
Yes.
And light highlights the issue, and if we're not careful at any one particular point, then what happens is we bite into the need to repair or fix it.
And fix, exactly,
Which then Belvaspatar comes along with its angels of frequency and an angel for everything, calling in those particular angels, and as they place that frequency in to the system of that person, to the frequency levels, their frequency has to lift. So it shatters the illusion.
Yes.
And so we can see it, but the healing happens to come in when the frequency aligns with it. That for me has just always been something incredible, and I've seen it physically happen. I've seen it physically going on with any of the clients that I've worked with. But there was a comment, and it's a private comment, so I won't go into the details of it, but what Greg, as a healer in Belvaspatar healer in America, is saying within that message, he's saying is that many people aren't ready to hear or see or want it.
Yes.
And this is what Almin was saying really about, the sacred cows are going, we hold all of these things dear. They don't want to hear it. They want, what they think is right or wrong. And I see that in many people around me, is that they're stuck in a belief system of what is right or wrong and can't get out of it. And that shot of that frequency, and maybe the organs are also helping us to realize that by saying I need to live in my highest frequency, otherwise I'm not in balance.
And so often over the last couple of weeks, Armin has talked about arising and standing in your sacredness and taking your place as the sacred governor.
Definitely.
So we have to govern our bodies. We cannot allow our bodies to govern ourselves.
And take great care of all of that process along the way. But we have an audio now from Almin, so let's listen to it, because it's about Almin teaching us to live in dynamic balance.
Yes.
And I think it's important to understand that all these levels, all these realities have to be balanced, because if one is out, another's going to have to fall or take its place, and it can't do that.
Let's listen to
outer
that.
space again. So let's do that.
Balance is not what most people think it is. Most people think that it is perfect equilibrium, and that to live a balanced life means that nothing disturbs our equilibrium. But that is not balance. That is in fact stasis. And stasis leads to decay because it leaks energy and ultimately to death. Balance itself is dynamic. One part of it is receptive and stationary, but the other part of it is movement. Let's analyze what living a balanced life really means. When we live in balance, there is a pulsation that happens between that which is proactive and masculine and that which is receptive and feminine. Let's take, for instance, passion and joy. Passion is the desire to know. It seeks the what's next across the horizon. But joy is the desire to just be. Some call it the desire to live. It is the quiet moments in front of the fireplace. It is the stillness after a snowfall in the forest. That is joy. If you overpolarize into joy, you underachieve, not a life of balance. If you overpolarize into the activity of always reaching for what is without your reach, that becomes overpolarized in the activity of passion. And one ends up not knowing the one big choice in life. What is life enhancing and what is not? In searching for something new to know, to understand, to conquer, passion must return to its joy in balance, so that the joy can tell it what is life enhancing, what increases the desire to live. It's the guidance system. So in other words, a life of balance goes without and then returns within, coming home to the self as its guidance system. This creates a life that is lived, which is called by the Toltec mysticisms a path with heart. When we live a path with heart, combining it with the activity that it prompts, we are living a life of balance. There is, however, another factor when we are living in balance, and that is balancing in expression the inner subpersonalities. Within each of us, there's an inner nurturer. There's an inner child. There's an inner wise person called by some the inner sage. There's the inner warrior that defends our boundaries. One of the reasons for the success of the societies of Native American indigenous peoples is that model of the subpersonalities was what they based their society on. In the very center of their circle were the weak and the meek that had to be taken care of, the children of the tribe. Around them were the sages, the elders, the elderly people that had to take care of the children, but themselves needed some care. Around them were the nurturers, and the nurturers had to take care of the elderly within and the very inner circle, which was the children. Around that circle was the circle of the warriors, and the warriors protected the women who were the nurturers, the elderly, and the children. They protected the boundaries of the organism. This brought a dynamic balance, an interplay, but a structure that was sustainable. This is the epitome of inner balance as we learn to express and live these inner subpersonalities.
You're back in studio with myself, Paul, and Diane Nico on our sound desk doing a wonderful job tonight. There we were listening to the mystic and seer Almin talking about how to live a life of dynamic balance. This is a Radio Belvaspata South Africa show for Thursday the 16th of February. Thank you for staying with us. Thank you for listening live. If you're on podcast, we'd still love to hear from you. So do send us an email or add a comment here if you'd like. info@belvaspata.co.za. Send us messages on our Facebook page under Belvaspata Healing South Africa as well. We'd love to hear hear from you. Any input, any insights you can share, add to the show. And as we were sitting listening to all of this, Diane and I were staring at each other, and there's just this comment that we sometimes have in South Africa, and it's like, no way. As we were listening to Almeen, and Diane was going through the information that she's written down, which I spoke about earlier, and we were aligning it with the discussion of living in the moment and expanding that expression into full exponential experience, and therefore we will then dissolve time. So Diane, what did you see? What did you do?
Well, as Paulie and I are listening to Almeen's discussion of the sub-personality in the family, and the inner child, and the nurturer, and the sage, and the warrior, Paul, you talked about that full moment, that moment of absolute fullness, where there's no need to go anywhere. And then quite by chance, so because I'm a visual learner, I've got to draw everything, I was just looking at the atom and the inside of the atom and the nucleus, and that the electrons which orbit around it, and it just seemed to mirror that sub-personality family as well. And isn't it astounding how the expressions of the inner and the outer are in such synchronicity?
As that loop of going to the outer comes back to the inner. So, but that's not all, listeners. I think we really need to turn this into a YouTube TV show or something, so we can actually get the full moment. What happens is every week we have printout of themes of the shows and basic information which we look at, just for highlights and pointers. And as Diane was sitting listening to the Seer Almeen there talk about living a life of dynamic balance, she was drawing circle after circle after circle, and then she pulled the paper aside to reveal what she had drawn earlier over the last couple of days, and there was the exact diagram of the nucleus and the atom and everything else to go with it. And yes, you can see exactly how things shift. But we said a while ago how our DNA changes through,
yes,
these healing aspects of Belvaspata. And once the DNA has come into its full openness, all experiences are valid. They're all available, I think is the correct word.
Well, Paul, if we're talking about experiences being available, then we're back to the timelines, because what is a timeline? It is just the potential of consciousness.
But the timeline is also unexperienced processes, isn't it?
Yes, apparently unexperienced.
Yeah. So it's all there available in its potential, as we said, but have not yet possibly experienced or attained that awareness or that ability to hold that particular process. Well, that's something.
Isn't that
something
astounding?
Insightful tonight.
So we can intend, our intention can be manifest, and that will enable a jump of timeline or a jump of parallel realities.
But I think our intention is only based on what we have available to us right now.
At the moment.
And at this moment, we know there's some programmings are dissolving, belief systems are dissolving. So everything would be based on that, but exponentially as that gets released, then we have to be able to grow our awareness to that point where the next level of processes has to come through.
Yes.
And that's step by step. I mean, that's
and Paul, you've made a point here. The idea is not to keep looking beyond, but to live fully in the moment, in the reality that we find ourselves in. That then allows a shift in potential.
Really dynamic. Isn't that incredible, just the processes that are going on? Again, I've reached a point where I'm staring up at the walls and the ceilings here, but I can't speak because
we need time
of the moment to process that. But anyway, there we go. So but Almeen also talks about these aspects of it. Let's just talk a little bit about something here. She says, however much you are wanting to interpret life, you cannot, from your vantage point, know how life is flowing. You do not have the big picture. You can also not interpret with your senses beyond the matrices. All life that can be interpreted from the mind, the heart, or instinct is only from inside of the grid. That which is outside our matrix must be felt by the high heart in the sternum. Then it must be interpreted by the fullness of your being, accessing the essence of its meaning. Allow yourself just to be, and your largest self will guide you. That's from, obviously Almeen.
Yes.
So absolutely incredible. Yes, we can only see perhaps where we could go to because of this moment. We can imagine maybe fuller and more beautiful things. But just the fact that Almeen has now gone 300 years into the future, and she's seen all those particular opportunities. I mean, how difficult to describe that coming back to the context of trying to share with us on a limited intellectual level, or intellect, I think maybe is a better word at this moment.
Very difficult for us to perceive that. I've lost my train of thought right now. I'm going to hand that back to you, Paul.
Okay, so we were discussing these aspects of timeline and Almin going into that future, bringing all those particular aspects back with it. But I think also on a very deep level for me, it gives us courage to actually take that next step of unfolding whatever we need to unfold. Because where else does it come from but from you and me and every other person playing the perfect role? Because everything has perfection, even if we don't like it.
Well, we don't have to like it. Yeah, that's the point. But I'm just thinking that intention that we spoke about earlier in the show, surely that is related to a field of hope or glad expectation. That's not longing for something different. That's just setting the intention of a field of hope.
And knowing that we are far more than what we are at this moment.
Yes.
Absolutely incredible. And trusting ourselves enough to go with it. So something else has developed as well within the process here, because on Almin Diary, again, if people wish to go and just look at that, if our listeners tend to go look at almindiary.com, there are principles of divine compassion which have just been loaded up. And Almin has received the first 3 of a total of 8 principles of divine compassion. And in a couple of weeks, Almin will share all 8 concepts on one of her other websites and expand on them. The question is this something you are already practicing? So I'll go through the 3 because I think they fit in perfectly where we are at the moment in terms of taking that step of what it is that we need to practice. Can you remember a little while ago we spoke about the need and the aspect of developing our compassion and not being cold-hearted and just saying, oh, well, that's their stuff, that's my boundary, don't step over it.
Yes.
We actually spoke about developing compassion. So there were highlights of that coming in. But the first principle of divine compassion, and this is the first 3 out of 8, says, number 1, experiencing the rapture of the real, touching the real and timeless core of another. So that's also very deep. So I'll just repeat that again.
Yes.
Experiencing the rapture of the real, touching the real and timeless core of another. And I think that allows us to develop the ability to see a realness in somebody else and not look at the programs and beliefs and facade.
Yes.
In the last few weeks, Nick and I have been talking about so much of people wanting the sense of importance to be fed, and then when that's not being fed, the self-pity that absolutely follows. We've had to work very hard on ourselves, because obviously you see with our heart there's something going on within, so that's triggered that work for us. But we've really been seeing it, and it's like a switch that goes on, but there's no realness in those particular people. We're seeing like a false projection of a value system that they're living in, which feeds their ego identity or feeds
their need at the time.
Need.
Yes.
They don't seem to have a compassion within themselves. It's like they've gone above it or beyond it now. And for me, there's no realness of that. There's no connection to somebody when they're in that particular state.
But Paul, how often when we do not have compassion for ourselves, we lapse into a kind of self-abandonment. I've seen that in myself, where you have no compassion for yourself. Somehow there's just no compassion for anyone else. And you are tougher and harder, and you lack, I'll speak in the first person, and I lack then the ability to see beyond what appears to be.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are trapped in that process, so that there's so much other, can I use the word realness at this moment? I'll be careful how I'm using it, but there's like a process where people can't see that realness. That's what I was going back earlier is to say, where people are trapped in an identity and cannot get out of it, no matter how much they're suffering. And they don't want to get out of it because it feeds that identity, and there's no compassion for themselves. But there, I think you've hit it right on the head, that if we do not have compassion for ourselves, and I'm just taking this now back to the round circles and atom and DNA that you were talking about, and what Almin was saying is about, in the Native American tribal systems, the weak are in the middle, and then on the outer there's another, and the stronger ones are all taking care of the inner ones. I don't see that happening in our country per se on a physical level. It just seems to be complete abandonment of anything that does not feed what is needing in terms of that self-importance.
Yeah, it seems to have gone, sort of right back to, the weak being destroyed and
Absolutely.
and the timid being pushed aside.
And that this is no compassion. Democrazy, right?
Yeah.
Democrazy.
Yes.
Right, the second principle of divine compassion: when you find another expression of the infinite, honor the alchemy of the meeting of two divine perspectives to create new possibilities, and guard its sanctity from the pollution of worldly games. That's really what we're talking about as well. As look at that divine perspective and work with it. I just think these new principles are incredible to work with.
And those worldly games, that's the dramas, that's the memories that invade and dictate.
You've been trapped in that programming.
Yes.
We're seeing so much of that developing. It's absolutely fascinating.
And that drama is exhausting, and that's what we need to remove our energy and our contribution from it.
Really incredible. Eh? Right, number 3. We fearlessly enter into the vastness of one another, that you may be reminded of the sacredness that hides within form. Enter with your heart, so that they may not be overwhelmed. There you go. If you go on a mental level and logical level, ain't going to work. And that's compassion of entering with your heart. That's what I think. When you go and really care for somebody, but you're not biting into the ego identity, all the worldly games that will follow with it. There has to be an authenticity there that then emerges. That's a new perspective.
And that's exactly what Almin was talking about in the Belvas Patar, where it's a path of heart. If we can follow that.
Yeah, absolutely incredible.
Isn't it interesting how the sacredness that hides within form, we so often miss it?
Yeah, and Belvas Patar, healing of the heart.
Yes.
So there's that aspect of living in that absolute compassion. So some interesting work we're having to do as we're going along and what is coming up.
This sounds really magnificent.
So there's the 3 principles of divine compassion that we've got. What we have is another audio from the TV personality Jason Silver called The Big Picture, and it's from his series called The Shots of Awe. I enjoy Jason Silver just because of the dynamic that he brings to his programs and his teachings the whole time. It just makes you look at things on a different level. Yes, you get your emotions involved, you get your thoughts involved with it, but I just find the inspiration very good, and I hope our listeners are enjoying him too.
Enjoy it, everybody.
This is called The Big Picture.
There's a great anecdote about the very first photograph taken of Earth from the vantage point of space. The idea was that this photograph occasioned a profound shift in our understanding of ourselves. You see, for the first time in human history, we could look back at our planet in its entirety and see the big picture. This provided an ontological awakening. It changed our story, our narrative. It upgraded our self-image. It expanded our consciousness. New maps for new realities, as they say. Astronauts in orbit call this experience the overview effect, a boundary-shattering sense of revelation and global interconnectedness, where we shake off our petty differences and emerge with a sense of global responsibility, global consciousness, and global citizenship. Carl Sagan's famous Pale Blue Dot film echoed this same idea. From the vantage point of space, there are no lines dividing nations, no geographical subdivisions, no flags or racial divides or disputed territory. There is only Earth, a single celestial body teeming with life, the womb in which we dwell. Yet the fact is, our historically myopic point of view, most certainly our limited perspective, has resulted in much animosity. We have all too often organized ourselves into competing hostile tribes, subjugating each other for land and resources, and misrepresenting the big picture into a story of borders, subdivisions, and dividing lines. Too much hostility, not enough empathy and compassion. Cultural differences, religion, tribes, nation, race, these are creative expressions and variations that should and could be celebrated. Instead, they've become symbols that are all too often used to create suffocating boundaries. And they are increasingly ill-conceived to address the challenges of a hyper-connected global world. As advancements in technology and information enable greater mobility of ideas, goods, and people, the role of the physical border is shifting and due for an upgrade. Conflicts remain, And too many people are restricted access to the increasingly fluid means of migration, transportation, and movement. Migration has always been a defining factor of the human experience. Migration has and continues to touch all nations, cultures, and regions, all peoples on the planet. Migration has been the seed at the heart of thriving societies, accelerating the dissemination of knowledge and ideas. Restricting migration is ultimately like restricting the flow of ideas. In much the same way that we don't tolerate censorship or book burning, we might consider the ways in which restricting the free movement of people can be equally punishing to the idea of human flourishing. The desire to become a global citizen is human. We all have it, and we all share the same goals for safety, comfort, and prosperity for our family. Some are fortunate enough to be able to invest in a second residence and citizenship, while others are forced to seek asylum for their survival. Being a global citizen is also about the strong and the wealthy helping the weak and the poor, as we saw with the Global Citizen Tax Initiative. Border disputes, conflict zones, armed borders, these are things that persist and need to be addressed. We need a new story, a new lens with which to address these inconsistencies. We need to scale up, to unleash a truly global citizenry, exchanging ideas, beliefs, goods, and services. It has been said that empathy rarely extends beyond our line of sight. And so perhaps it is by extending our gaze, using marvelous new storytelling tools like virtual reality, that we can bridge divisions and bring worlds together, ushering in a form of radical empathy to see the other as ourselves, where boundaries are dissolved and compassion reigns supreme. A massive transformation of consciousness, a software upgrade for mankind, birthing a new kind of global citizen. We can do this.
And you're back in studio with myself, Paul, and Diane, as we discussed Democrazy moments. As we go through life unfolding, we're talking about mindlessness and mindfulness. We're talking about healing timelines and how they're merging together. Interesting show, and I think thanks to that beautiful audio by the TV personality and inspiration seeker, Jason Silver, he's really just given us a summary of everything that we spoke about tonight. And what do you think?
Absolutely. He talked about new maps for new realities. He talked about extending our gaze, seeing the oneness of it all. He talked about empathy and compassion, and it was superb.
Really incredible data, and just the sharing and the dynamic of it for me is just wonderful. Mm-hmm. So thank you to Jason Silva. I'm not sure if he knows we play his processes, but it's available online, so we're going to use it as we can along the way. So that's our show for tonight. Just as a closing comment from the Seer Almin, like sunshine and shade, life brings times of activity, which is the development of outer reality, and passivity, the development of inner space. Honor both by cooperating with these rhythms of life. And I think that's something beautiful. We need to relook at. I mean, just the fact that you had 40 winks this afternoon. Isn't that a wonderful moment to say that you were able to do that?
Yes, I was very grateful for that.
Yeah. And have you noticed is that we go through these times of intense activity and then you stop? It's like you're doing them all nowadays, but you know when you've reached your limit, so you just stop.
It's enough.
And you rest. I mean, we can't fit a day and a night and a 24-hour and a 12-hour program any longer. We're just doing what we need to do
at that moment.
Also understanding that we are working as well, so there are those dynamics in place, but we are bringing it all into play. Really incredible. Thank you, Diane, for all of that. So, I think we're going to close off tonight just by saying thanks to Nico for handling our sound desk tonight. We are still running on basic equipment, but the show goes on and we're getting it out there, and I look forward to every single week Next week we'll bring in some other aspects into it about life itself and the way we see life. We're going to be talking about all of those particular processes and the high heart and the work that it does within the healing process which we're all experiencing. We're going to close off now just with a little bit of music from the Sia Almin called Inner Space Fairy Song, and we'll then go into our closing track. So this just gives everyone a few minutes of some meditation, some time together, just to sit together as a family, as a united group of light workers, of light bringers and light bearers, light seekers around the world, all sharing our inspiration from our own perspectives. We welcome your input. We love the messages that you're sending to us, and we are very, very inspired when you do so, because that also gives us some process to work with. And that's the particular show for tonight. Diane, thank you for everything that you've brought with us.
Thank you, Paul.
And may your inner family be sacred and govern what needs to be governed.
Thank you, Paul, and I say good night to everyone out there. And may your inner reality and your inner space cooperate and bring great harmony and peace. Good night to you all.
Love, praise, gratitude, and trust. Goodbye.
You've been listening to Radio Balbaspata, South Africa. Thank you for listening and sharing in our discussion. Should you have any questions with regards to the healing modality of Balbaspata or have any healing needs, please send us an email to info@balbaspata.co.za or add comments to our page on Spreaker.com so we can work on providing a suitable response. We now close this episode with the eternal ascension qualities of love, praise, gratitude, and trust, and look forward to sharing again with you next week. Goodbye.